Now, the teams that made to the finals of the European Championships are, in the position of opening government, Oxford A. In the position of opening opposition, Oxford D. Closing government, Oxford B. And closing opposition, King's College London A. Congratulations.
And the motion for the debate, I'm sure you agree, a very topical motion, considering where we are now. This House would ban the display of Nazi and Soviet symbols. And speaker for this round will be N.
And without much further ado, the House recognizes Will Jones as Prime Minister.
So James and I have this private museum, you might say. Just a couple of things, mementos, things that make James smile in the evening. And because we're not keen on criminalizing ourselves, we want to be quite clear about what we are doing. We don't think this is a debate about museums. We don't think this is a debate about the educative function of symbols or hanging up like a Nazi uniform in the Imperial War Museum. What we think this is about is the active and ideological use of symbols in political life, in public life. And so what we're banning in public life is all of this stuff. Its use in rallies, its use by skinheads, its presence on monuments. And we accept that there may be a couple of cases where this line is hard to draw, so we say simply, where it's ambiguous, we're going to ban it. We will not take the risk. You may ask where we're doing this. The answer is wherever we find it. We think this is likely to be more of a problem in Poland than it is in Botswana, but if it is a problem in Botswana, we'll do it there too. I'm going to talk about two things. Firstly, I'm going to talk about public discourse and communicative action, or, if you prefer, I'm going to talk about when it's legitimate to ban things just because they're offensive, and only because they're offensive. Secondly, I'm going to talk about why we regard these symbols as extremely offensive. I don't propose to spend too much time on that. James is going to talk a little bit more about ideology, oppression, that sort of chat. So, when is it legitimate to ban things purely and only because they are offensive? When is it legitimate in particular to limit speech acts? Because we think that in general, and we think the opposition will agree with me, that there is a presumption in favor of free speech. We think it's kind of cool quite a lot of the time. But what we also think is there's no reason to regard freedom of speech as an overriding good in every circumstance, right? And there's no reason to believe that public debate is always good all of the time, unless it's the right sort of public good some of the time. And what we want to say, and we want to get very clear right from the start, is that a speech act can be oppressive. Not in the sense of me going, those Muslims, you want to go beat them up, because that's incitement, and we think that should be illegal. But simply in the sense of saying, these people are scum, these people are worth nothing, these people are less than animals, and they deserve to be treated as less than animals, where no incitement is there. Now, why is that true? That is true because the social world, the world in which you live, is constructed through language and through meaning. The way you understand yourself, the way you understand actions, the meaning you impart to actions is mediated through meaning and language and all the rest of that. But we say that alone doesn't mean a speech act can be oppressive. That's just the first step. The second thing that needs to be true in order for a speech act to be oppressive is if that act is bound up in relations of power. And that's why the display in the museum is not oppressive, but why using it at a rally might be, ladies and gentlemen. Because we think these symbols can and are used across Europe and in other places to intimidate people, to scare people, to make people feel like they cannot go out, to make people feel like they are less, to make people feel like their words do not count the same as other people's words. And the test for that is, are these used in political and public life in relations of domination? We are perfectly willing to accept this may apply in other cases. We think that's fine. We do want to ban hate media. We think that's absolutely all right. Our test is quite simple. Do citizens get deprived of fundamental goods through permitting these speech acts to take place? And we say that happens when these symbols are wielded by those in power. And you're going to be surprised, because I'm going to take the point of information from the team, not from Oxford. Go.
If every element of these people's lives is focused upon trying to intimidate those who they do not like, then something other than the symbol is going to identify them through their views, through the type of haircut they have, through the new symbol they choose, or the clothing they have.
We may well ban other things. That's fine. We think hate speech should also be banned. Bye-bye. Anyway, so, final bit of that point, we think it is entirely legitimate for the state to not just monopolise, but control and shape public discourse in order to secure basic goods for its citizens, such as not feeling afraid, not feeling degraded, not feeling oppressed. So, secondly, why these symbols? And the first thing we say is, there may be others. We think in a country James Dre comes from, apartheid symbols may occupy a similar role. We think things like memorabilia celebrating Joseph Desiré Mobutu in Congo might be similar. We're happy to say that those principles that we've laid down here might work there as well. But we say more generally, there is a lacuna in the current law, which is that we only pay attention to words when we ban incitement. We only pay attention to words when we ban hate speech or hate media. And we say that a symbol is still a piece of shared communication. A symbol is still a piece of shared language and can function in exactly the same way. No, thank you. And also, we do think racist hate speech should be banned, even if there's no direct incitement, because, as I said before, we think it can still be oppressive. But furthermore, we do think there are reasons to believe that these symbols are uniquely awful, because they do not, ladies and gentlemen, represent valid political ideologies at all. Now, firstly, we do think pluralist societies are kind of cool, and we do think that in a pluralist society we like that people disagree about what the good is and how society should be organised. That's fine. But we also think that in order for society to exist at all, we must at minimum agree to live together. We must consent to associate as one society. And so we say a basic commitment, any ideology that wants to exist in the modern world, must be a commitment to the equal concern and respect which every single citizen deserves, right? We say a genuine pluralism, I think you're out of time. A genuine pluralism is one where you have an overlapping consensus of people who disagree, but an overlapping consensus of reasonable doctrines of the good, right? We say the problem is that these are ideologies which have perpetrated the barbaric slaughter of millions upon millions of people for no better reason than they were an enemy of the proletariat, or they were Jewish, or they were gay, or they were disabled, or they were a gypsy, or dozens of other things. We say that if you deny the basic rights of your citizens, if you say as an ideology, there are people who should be exterminated, you are not a valid ideology, you are evil. We say you're not part of the legitimate political discourse, and we're going to expunge you. So because speech matters, because symbols matter and function as part of language too, and because these are really uniquely vile symbols that also matter, I'm very happy to propose.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. And the House recognizes Shenggu Li as the leader of the opposition.
Of course, Nazis and communists who think we should send people to the gulags don't represent valid political ideologies. We know that they are invalid because we don't forbid them to assemble and have symbols. We know they are invalid because we vivify truth through its collision with error. We know they are wrong because each time they pop their ugly face up in public with a new symbol, we will ridicule them and we will show and say why they are wrong. We think that it's of course a fundamental truth that in becoming a society, to quote William, we consent to associate as one society. We consent not to send each other to death camps. But William seems to think that this truth is a special truth. It's one that he would quite like to ban symbols that attack. It's a truth that he thinks should not have to defend itself against competing views. We think that this is a truth. We think it continues to be a truth in our minds only insofar as those who oppose it can assemble under symbols, and only insofar as the defenders of reason and society can knock them down. So, William basically told us, well, we can ban things because they are offensive. And he gave us this very interesting philosophical reason why, right? We are calling his bluff. Let's take that speech apart. A speech act can be oppressive because our social world is constructed through language. Really? Right. Maybe part of what we think is indeed determined by language, but part of what gives language power is the power of taboo. We make words powerful, we make symbols powerful, not only by using them, but by disregarding and suppressing their use through law. This is going to be a big part of my case, but let's get on to this next point. He said, it's bound up in relations of power. Now, this is a remarkably vague piece of analysis, right? I assume he's not meaning that it's a literal physical bundle, so he means something else, right? But here's the problem. If he means, in the literal sense, that powerful people in political society are using these symbols to oppress other people, that's just false. We don't have Nazis and Soviets in parliaments in most civilized countries. If he means that they're bound up in relations of violence, in relations of power between individual citizens hitting and beating each other on the street, well, we've got two things to say. One, if I'm being beat up on the street, no. The fact that the person, who's beating me up has a symbol on his shoulder or does not is not going to make a huge difference to me. Secondly, we think that the eminent problem there has to do with the fact that we allow people to establish these relations of power through the use of covert violence, not the fact that we let them symbolize this relation once it's already there. So then we've been told, well, that's okay. No, because we can ban offensive speech because it deprives people of fundamental goods, such as a right not to feel degraded. We have a problem with this because we think by and large people don't have rights to feel a certain way. We think that how you feel is very much a function of what sort of person you are and how excitable you are. Ben feels degraded a lot more easily than I do because I have a thick skin. We don't think that political societies legislate on the internal emotional states of people, or that we have corresponding rights to have certain emotional states when these are clearly functions of things like our digestion, like no thank you, how we feel that day, and moreover are not publicly observable and can thus not be verified, no, as actually being provided for. So, that whole idea which we were fed, just wrong, right? So what do we think today? We think that symbols are made powerful by taboo, and we'll explain how their speech, that case, is going to make them more powerful. No, we're going to talk furthermore about why their case attempts this vaguely Orwellian notion of expunging the losers of ideological battles from history, and why that's bad. Ben is going to talk about why this removes important cultural and historical reference points that make history come alive outside the museum. So, let's start. When Gone with the Wind first showed, there was a little sentence at the end that caused huge furor. They were the words, "Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn." Those words don't carry the same power now. They carried the power then because we used to censor the word damn, because we built up social inhibitions about the use of the word damn via the law. When those faded, no thank you, the power of the symbol faded. If we return them, the symbol gets new power. No, not only by being made a special secret symbol that we can claim is a symbol of our martyrdom, but by the fact, no thank you, that the social cachet, the social power of a word increases when we reduce instances of its use. That's why swear words are shocking. That's what gives the magic, no thank you, to symbols that we think are hugely offensive. If we do this, if we say, oh no, you can't possibly see these things in public life, cover your ears, cover your eyes, no, this makes these symbols powerful all the more. Yes.
Swastikas already have a taboo on them. Why is banning them going to increase that taboo?
Well, we think that they have that taboo on them, but they have a taboo of a very special kind. We think now when you see a swastika, you get to say things like, that guy's just silly, he's a Nazi, we don't like him. But we think the fact that when you ban the swastika, you give it a special power. Not only is he a guy with weird political opinions that we disagree with, he's a guy with a symbol so powerful it can't be brought to our eyes, that its very display threatens to corrupt us. And the existence of that power, money and mere social condemnation can't buy. We want the sort of social condemnation that comes outside the law, where we ridicule people with swastikas. We don't want the sort of social condemnation where the law gives them a special power by giving them a veil of silence. We want real ridicule in public to rip that veil away and remove those symbols of their oppressive power. No, you're out of time. More than that, we think that they have this strange notion, kind of like what we saw in 1984, right? He who controls the present controls the future. He who controls the past controls the present. He who controls the present controls the past. If we wipe out enough of these symbols, we'll forget they're there. We think that's dangerous because we think that a lot of people who aren't communists and don't send people to death camps nonetheless look favorably on symbols like the hammer and sickle and feel they're being marginalized if we take them down everywhere. We feel that furthermore, even those people who are quite nasty will take this as a rallying cry. We'll take it as a fact that because you're trying to wipe out people with similar political views to me off the map, we're going to push all the more. We think the idea that we can whitewash and expunge history because the old ideologies die out and don't need to be knocked down by properly ridiculing their symbols in public is dangerous in any democratic society. And for those reasons, that case just doesn't stand.
Thank you. The House recognizes Mr. James Dray as the Deputy Prime Minister.
Coming from Africa, this has been a rather difficult tournament for me. We don't have debates about giving people welfare or income tax and stuff like that. Our government can't collect those things. But thank God, finally a debate I know something about. Yes, Nazis and Soviets and bad guys. I know something about that. So what I'm going to talk about is how this particular motion, idea, the existence of these symbols, denies the possibility of meaningful agency to certain individuals in society, particularly oppressed people. And I'm also going to talk about how it shifts the discourse of public speech. But firstly, I want to deal with some rebuttal. He said on the opposition side that we are saying that this truth that we accept, that you shouldn't have genocide, you shouldn't wipe people out, is being given a special status by our prop. Yes, it is. We think that is a truth that is fundamental. We don't think that's a truth that we need to engage with other people to establish. We don't think that's a truth that we need a meaningful debate on. It is a truth that is fundamental to our society. And more than that, we do not believe, like he somehow believes, that there's rational communicative action in the presence of those symbols. He seems to imply that somehow we can make truth out of error, have a meaningful debate with someone standing under a swastika in a hall. It doesn't happen. It's because people who are Jewish or people who are black and see a large South African flag now do not have the ability to engage meaningfully in that scenario. Why? Because the fear that those symbols elucidate, carry out, are so strong and is so great that it restricts the ability of other people to engage with those individuals. And also because when someone stands under a Nazi symbol, they're not saying, I agree with some nice Nazi stuff, let's have a debate on it. They're associating themselves with the oppressive act. They're associating themselves with violence, and they're associating themselves with genocide, and we do not believe that people have the right to do that. He also told us that somehow we're creating a taboo by getting rid of this. Just like with the I don't give a damn thing. Well, frankly, we don't think that I don't give a damn, no thank you, is analogous to this scenario. But more than that, we do aim to eliminate these things. We don't believe that having lots of them in society somehow makes them less, like having a lot just discriminates the taboo. We think Nazi Germany had tons of them, and Britain still didn't like it, and lots of other people thought it was quite a dodgy thing to have. But we also say, he said that what happens when we have them is we can go up to Nazis and say, yes, you're a bit silly, that's bad, oh, they're dodge. And we think that's the problem. We think that's often all that happens. We want more. We do want these things to be disgusting and awful. We don't think that ridicule is going to stop. We think it's going to become more than ridicule. We think it's going to be associated with a criminal act. It's going to say that society thinks it is disgusting and totally bad, whereas now it's just an associative with liminal. No. And then on the other question of whether we think it's going to be a rallying cry for fascists and the like. Well, firstly, we don't think that's a good enough reason to keep something which is as bad as we think it is. But secondly, we eliminate a path for action which is currently used by these individuals. Finally, he said, different people respond to symbols and other things differently to others, and therefore, because different people respond to language differently, we can't ban things that people respond to differently. Well, we think people respond to physical harm differently as well, and we think the state legislates on it. Some people, no thank you, feel more pain from some physical acts than others. That's not a reason not to say that that physical act shouldn't be banned. But firstly, we think on why this denies the possibility for meaningful agency. We think the main problem with these symbols, no thank you, is that their very display creates subconscious reactions in people. We think with Nazi people who are sympathizers to the Nazi cause, it creates a call to arms. It is associated with a particular point in history, with a particular action, which we think is what gives that symbol power. No. It means that individuals can get past hate speech laws. They can get past laws which mean that I can't stand up in society, no thank you, and say that every single Jew should be killed because they are Jewish, or because I hate black people and I think it's disgusting and I should harm them. But if I put up a swastika, which means exactly the same thing, and which activates exactly the same neural pathways, somehow I get away with it, and I think that's wrong. Yes, Johnny?
The problem about saying that we can ban it because it is clearly illegitimate is that a lot of people disagree about what things are clearly illegitimate. Where do you draw the line?
Johnny, they're wrong. This is not something we can have a rational debate about. It's not like you can say that the people who think that it is legitimate to kill millions of people are right, and we're not. It's not a meaningful act. No. The problem is that the opposition is denying the communicative nature of symbols, and we think that's a problem. We think it means that individuals get called to arms. The association with the violence when flown on the streets means not just that there is a group of people, no thank you, who are saying, look, I'm a Nazi as well. It means that it's associated that violent acts can then follow. But why is it more than just why are these symbols more than a haircut or a funny walk or whatever? It's because their meanings are not created in isolation. These particular symbols are unique in the sense that they have been created by history, and more importantly, they are created with particular success in history. These are the rallying cries for these individuals. We do not think that it is likely again that we will let groups of people go and commit genocide in Western Europe. We don't think they're going to have an opportunity to create new symbols to rally around in the same way. Those symbols won't have the same emotional attachment as the symbols that are, no thank you, that are associated with a thing that worked had. And so we think if we ban that, no thank you, what it did, I don't know if you heard about the genocide, if we don't think that they then are going to be able to create other symbols that activate the same neural pathways. And so we think we can eliminate that in our society. But finally what we think is that for oppressed people, this is not about debater land. It's not about a land in where you can just say, oh, let's have a nice discussion. These symbols create irrational fear and make people so uncomfortable, feel so unworthy, feel like they are not part of the society, that they are unable to engage in that society anymore. When someone puts up an old South African flag where I come from, it doesn't just say, I am a Boer, I agreed with apartheid, or whatever. It also says, you are not the same as me. You are not human. You do not deserve to exist in my country. And how can anyone feel safe in any environment, a hall, control outside on the streets, when people are displaying the very symbols that were used to oppress them, the very symbols that were associated more than that with a state that was used to oppress them. And we think that it means that individuals are then not able to exercise their autonomy in these societies. They're not able to feel like they are meaningful contributors to society. They're not able to feel like they can be real people. And for those reasons, ladies and gentlemen, we beg to propose.
Deputy Leader of Opposition, the House recognizes Ben Jasper.
On this side, we don't just believe that offensive symbols cause offence. We believe that these symbols are a way in which we can position ourselves historically. We say that this might not apply as much to the swastika, but we say it does apply in quite significant and clear degree with symbols from the Soviet Union that still exist across Eastern Europe and throughout Russia at the moment. And these are the two things that I want to move on to. Why we think that removing these symbols remove important historical and cultural reference points, and why those reference points are so important. And secondly, we want to talk about Russia in general, what we think Russia's response to this move will be, and why we think that it will probably get very, very, very angry. But we need to deal with some of the things that James has said first. First, he talked about the power of symbols. He said they're powerful, people can be very fearful of them. And we agree with him. We agree that some minorities will feel offended and very much unable to act fully as agents if they see those symbols. We say under their model, under their situation, when at the moment, any harmless crank can wear a swastika, and we know they're probably a harmless crank, when you give them the power to say that they are wearing it because they are committing a criminal act, we say that that visual power, the fact that society censors it legally through the law, gives them an enormous amount of power to make people even more fearful when they can wear it knowing that the full arm of the law will come down. Secondly, ladies and gentlemen, we say it's much better to know who these people are when they wear them, when they march around in fields like the National Front did in the 1970s and say, you are ridiculous, you are horrible Nazis, you do hold these particular beliefs, and we know exactly who you are. We say they're still going to hold these rallies, they're still going to hold these viewpoints. It will just be done in back alleys and in dark rooms, and we say that should stop. Finally, we think that people should stop wearing these symbols because of the pressure of social discourse in general. We think it's much better for Prince Harry, for instance, from my country, I'm very sorry for him, stops wearing a Nazi swastika to go to a party because of social pressure and discourse, because the tabloid press tell him that it's an unacceptable thing to do, because his advisors tell him that it's an awful thing to do, not because the law says unthinkingly that he must not do it. We want people to act in a way in which they take into account those preferences and make their own choices not to display those symbols, not because the law tells them that symbol is wrong. And finally, they talked about hate speech. And we're going to be bold on this side. We don't think people have the right to be offended. We think the far better way to challenge any of those hateful, horrid opinions is to engage with them in rational discourse, to show that those opinions are not acceptable, but to show that those opinions are not acceptable for reasons, not because we simply decide that they are not. No, thank you. Firstly, we think it removes important historical and cultural reference points. And so far, we've only really heard about those things which are used as symbols of sort of offence, which people wear, which people use at rallies. But from my week in Tallinn, I've noticed on lots of buildings there are still Soviet symbols. This remains throughout Eastern Europe. They are on the top of embassies, they are on the top of public buildings, they're on the top of cinemas. We say that those symbols are part of the fabric of current society. We say it's part of what it is to be Estonian, for instance, is to know that many of your buildings may have been partly designed by that particular influence. No, thank you. Secondly, we say, ladies and gentlemen, that they exist on things like war memorials too. We say this process involves etching off those war memorials and in some way disassociating those particular memorials and those objects from the historical context in which they were made. No, thank you. Secondly, we say it's about understanding. When, I don't know, little Jimmy walks up and down and says, "Mummy, what's that big star on top of that building?" she can explain what that symbol used to mean. That it used to mean that you were being run by a government from 2,000 miles away, that you used to be oppressed and locked up if you said anything against that government, and explain that now that symbol is much less powerful. Because it's in your everyday life, because you can walk past it every day, it is much less powerful, and that's so important. No, thank you. Thirdly, we say, why is that important? Well, we say it's because it's how you view yourself in the world, to know how relations between different governments acted in the past. We say that's how people still think of themselves. We can live in a postmodernist world where people think that they are single individuals and they're not reflected by particular countries, or they're not represented by those particular pasts. But most people do think they are of a particular nation, which has a particular history, which may be one that was oppressed. No, thank you. But secondly, we think that under this system, we're going to be equating the Soviet Union with the National Socialist Party and the National Socialist government in Germany. Firstly, we say we agree. We agree that those two things were horrific. We agree that in Ukraine and in Poland, mass genocides were committed against Jews and other people of those extractions. But we say that sometimes we have to hold those principles back because the Nazis don't control a state at the moment. But we say increasingly the government in Russia looks to those symbols and those acts of pride and makes those links very clear. Go. So, our case is fine for the swastika, but not for the hammer and sickle, and the reason being the Germans won't complain. Oh, come on, William. Come on, William. We say, ladies and gentlemen, it works for both, for all the stuff that Sheng Wu talked to you about, but in this particular instance, there are lots of very, very problematic issues which result. Firstly, we say that it coincides with a time where Russia is using the star, like the hammer and sickle again, where it's using the half-wreathed star, where it's having military parades, where it's moving towards a more and more autocratic government, where it's actively celebrating beyond its borders that particular history. We say, at the moment, Russians absolutely hate the Nazis. They see themselves as very different. 27 million of them died fighting with them, and even if it's going to offend that principle that they want to uphold, those people are going to view the West as viewing them just like that enemy that destroyed their country. We say that's bad for several reasons. We just want to cooperate with them. We need their oil, we need their trade, we need them to be on side, but more importantly, we don't want them to view us as a massively hostile actor. And that's what this does. It etches and removes any trace, any of those big symbolic symbols from Eastern Europe and from other parts of Europe. And it says, we can't have those symbols there. We think it's important that we remember what oppression was in the form of those symbols. And we say we can do that much less easily when those symbols are physically driven from society. So for those reasons, and for all the reasons that Sheng Wu gave you, we beg to oppose.
Thank you. And bringing the debate to the second half of the table, Mr. Alex Wursnip.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to bring you two things today from Second Proposition. We're firstly going to tell you why you don't have a foundational right to display symbols. We're secondly going to move on and we're going to talk about the influence of symbols. Because we think something that's been left from this debate is the practical effect that symbols have on recruiting people to neo-Nazi and extremist ideologies in the modern age. We think that's a huge problem, it's something we want to prevent, and we're going to talk about it. I'm going to weave rebuttal as I go. Let's start with the first point on why you don't have a foundational right to display symbols. And First Proposition already told us that rights to expression can be trumped. To this we add that they can be particularly trumped in situations where what's being expressed is anti-democratic. Why do we think this? because the whole point on opposition about discourse and about ideas clashing and coming together is about democratic participation. We say non-democratic views specifically look to impede that participation. We say that they specifically look to impinge on the freedom of speech of others, which is necessary for the discursive process that opposition are talking about to occur. We say as a result of this, we have to prevent them from being expressed. So the truth that's being expressed is not an outcome of this democratic process, as Sheng Wu said that it was. It is the structure, the very process itself. And thus, in order to preserve the process that opposition are happy about, we have to restrict it at this point. Sheng Wu stood up and he said, the truth always stays the truth, therefore the truth always stays the truth in the minds of people. That's just a fallacy, ladies and gentlemen. The fact that the truth is always the truth does not mean that people will continue to believe it. Furthermore, on the second proposition, we tell you that even if the right to expression is important in the calculus of harm, these kinds of symbols are not the kind of expression that you have a foundational right to. Now let's be clear about this. We agree with first proposition that they're extremely powerful, that they can express messages, but we do not think they're something that you have a right to. Why is this? There are two possible justifications for these kinds of rights to expression. One concerns agency and participation. The idea here is that in order to be an agent, you have to be able to speak and express yourself. But we say that symbols are not fundamental to that. We say symbols are not fundamental to your agency and your ability to express yourself. Saying that you cannot show this specific historical symbol does not stop you from being able to do that. I'll take Johnny.
Doesn't it somewhat undermine the idea of agency for you to be telling people what they should have based their identity on?
Only in the very banal sense that telling anyone to do anything differently undermines agency. We don't think that it undermines an important kind of agency. By agency we mean the ability to be an actor that's able to choose your own beliefs, to able to choose who you are. We don't think symbols need to be a part of that. Okay. Secondly, no thanks, we say that when we talk about rights to expression, one of the ideas is that we require expression regardless of what our views are. To use a horrible philosophical construct, under a veil of ignorance, we could all agree that we want rights to speech so that we can advance our views. So even if we don't know what our views are, we want to be able to advance them. We say symbols are not things that we require to advance whatever our conception of the good is. The second justification we potentially see for rights to expression is on the basis of the social good, and this is what opposition were giving you. And they said that basically the outcome of the debate will be better if you have all these kinds of symbols going forward into it. But we say, again, symbols aren't fundamental. The debate does not occur between symbols. The debate occurs between ideas. So if you want to say, well, we need the symbols so that we can have the debate, that's just a fallacy. We think that was completely wrong. Let's secondly move on and talk about the influence of symbols and the practical line that we want to bring you from the second proposition today. The first thing we point out is that symbols are extremely seductive. Sheng Wu spoke about taboos. We agree that things that have taboos on them are immensely powerful. But we think that there is already a taboo on swastikas, ladies and gentlemen. When Sheng Wu said in response to my point of information that all that's believed at the moment is that swastikas are just silly, we think that's an immensely offensive view, ladies and gentlemen. We think there are many, many people who believe that swastikas are far more than just silly. And we think the mainstream society believes that, and consequently it is a taboo to display a swastika in the status quo. We think that was absolutely ridiculous for him to assert that it wasn't. We say that it specifically feels like an act of rebellion. That's why children all over Western Europe etch swastikas into their desks during class, because it feels like an act of rebellion, ladies and gentlemen. We think if there are less of them out there, if there are less of them influencing people, that means that they have less opportunity to do this. The second thing we want to talk about within this point about influence of symbols is history and reference points. And we got this sort of spurious point from Ben that we need symbols to be able to educate people about their past. We say, absolutely not. We can educate them through telling them about things in history classes. He furthermore said that you need symbols to understand what it is to be someone of your national identity. He said, in order to know that you're Estonian, you've got to be able to be told this was a symbol that was here in Estonia once. We say people in Estonia should be able to change what it is to be Estonian, so that they cast off the connotations of the Soviet era, so that they cast off these negative connotations. We say they should be able to say, this is no longer part of our national identity. This is no longer a part of who we are. And that involves getting these things out of the public arena, just like they did when they took a prominent statue from Tallinn, and that did annoy the Russians, and we don't care. All right. We say furthermore that we don't need symbols to condemn these ideologies, but they are needed to affirm them because of their seductive power. Because a 15-year-old doesn't start with the ideology of Nazism, they start with the symbol. We say that furthermore, they do bring up feelings of nostalgia. We think Ben is being optimistic when he says everyone is going to say this is what it used to mean. We think some people will find them nostalgic, and that's a bad thing. We furthermore say that it's good to drive these symbols underground. We acknowledge that they will still exist to some extent after we ban them, but we say they will exist fundamentally within groups of their supporters, not in the public arena where they can recruit people that are not currently supporters with their seductive power. We furthermore think that there are coordination problems between supporters and that these kind of symbols allow them to come together, for instance, on marches. Finally, on Russia, we think it's wrong to allow Russia to control us. We think it's wrong for Estonia to allow Russia to control its identity. And furthermore, we think Russia should ban these symbols because we think it's wrong that they feel that these symbols are important to their history. We think it's wrong that they feel that they're part of their identity. And for all these reasons, I'm proud to propose.
Thank you, Alex. The House recognizes Louis Mooney as Member of Opposition.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the final of Britain's Got Talent. What we say on this side of the house, guys, is that Team Palumbo is going to win this debate by bringing you 3 points. Firstly, the conversion power of symbology. Secondly, that these symbols are symbols of past defeat. And thirdly, that we do want to be able to identify people by these symbols. Okay, but firstly, on to some rebuttal. And Alex basically gave us 2 key ideas with one other thing slipped in rebuttal that I want to point out as well. But the first was that symbols undermine and prevent debate. It undermines the agency of the individual. It's not, and then he also said it's not needed for debate. But the last thing he said was, well, actually, we want to get rid of we want to get rid of Russia being able to use these symbols to remember anything historical. And I just want to point out that that is contradictory to what we heard from the first prop, who said they were more than happy for historical use of these symbols to still be maintained. And we say, with Nazi and Soviet symbology, it is so prevalent that it is in every sort of historical or relatively recent historical museum, particularly in ex-Soviet Russia, ladies and gentlemen. So you will still have that, Alex, and you're undermining what they said. But onto this idea of not needed in debate and then preventing and undermining debate. And we say, as for the idea that symbols are not needed in debate, you cannot claim that to be true. You cannot pretend that people do not associate or affiliate themselves with symbols. We say on this side of the house that clearly someone like a religious group may find symbology fundamentally important in identifying who they are. Ladies and gentlemen, the symbols are important to them and in legitimizing themselves. A Protestant will not have Jesus on the cross. A Catholic will, to identify themselves and legitimate their beliefs. They do clearly use this for their agency, ladies and gentlemen. And we say, obviously, we're not associating Nazism with Catholicism, but to suggest that they're not used for providing agency is nonsense, and not needed in debate is nonsense. But more than that, on the idea of it undermines and prevents debate. If it is true that a Nazi symbol, by being a symbol, undermines debate, then any symbol symbol undermines debate. If any symbol undermines debate, why are they only getting rid of those symbols, no thank you, which they have decided they don't like? We say, ladies and gentlemen, they're not getting rid of all symbols, so they're not going with their full beliefs. But beyond that, no thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We say that it is important in a society that is, no thank you, saturated with these symbols, that they are able to, no thank you, defend against these symbols, no thank you, when they will still be wrongly used. Because if you say to a Nazi who hates your regime, we do not want you to use the Nazi swastika, no thank you, they're not going to think, okay, let's abide by the law, ladies and gentlemen. They're going to try and use these symbols in whatever way they can. No thanks, Alex, you had your chance. We say, ladies and gentlemen, that we want these people to be prepared when neo-Nazis do rise up and use the Nazi swastika, to have been in a society, no thank you, that prepares them to defend against such ideology and such symbolism, ladies and gentlemen, and the power of it, no thank you. We want them to be in a society that is saturated with these symbols, so they see that everyone, no thank you, recognizes these symbols, and everyone deals with these symbols through the way of, no thank you, ridiculing them as we do in society. Okay, so on to my first point, no thank you, the conversion power of symbology. We say, no thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We say that we recognize that these symbols can be used powerfully, but where do they gain their power from? No thank you. If I hang a swastika on the wall, it means nothing in and of itself. It doesn't have conversion power in and of itself, ladies and gentlemen. No thank you. We say that power comes by virtue of the way in which they are used to play upon mass psychology. No thanks. We say, ladies and gentlemen, that they do it either because people want to be part of a strong movement, ladies and gentlemen. They are attracted to and want to submerge themselves into these organizations, ladies and gentlemen, or they gain security and worth from these large organizations. We say, no thank you, that the Nazi symbol wasn't powerful before the Nazis were powerful, ladies and gentlemen. No thank you. So we say that they have no power, no thank you, apart from the power of those who hold up that symbol. No thank you. That's why they use them in mass rallies. We say that actually, in the vast majority of cases, it's no longer in a mass rally that you will see them holding up that banner. We say what will actually happen is in localized communities where people feel disenfranchised, you may have 30 skinheads who go on a march with that banner. No thank you, because you're not getting rid of them in private homes, you're saying. You may have 30 people going on a march with that banner, and we say that serves to undermine the very idea of using that banner for power. Why? No thank you, because they can no longer play on mass psychology in that way. We say when you see that there's only 30 people at the rally, ladies and gentlemen, you recognize that it doesn't have that power. It's not attracting you because you won't feel secure among those 30. Go, sir.
If you're a black person walking down the street and the 30 neo-Nazis walk down the street with that swastika, you're not going to be going, ooh, look, it looks like they don't have any power.
And what we say, ladies and gentlemen, what we say to that, what I've already said to that, is if you're a black person and you see those 30 people walking down the street in your local community, where they will be, because they're doing it on a localized level, because it's no longer on a national level, ladies and gentlemen, we say you're going to know them, not only by the swastika, ladies and gentlemen, no thank you, but by the skinhead, by the clothes that they wear, ladies and gentlemen, by everything else that they do, by the fascist spitting that they're doing at the people that they don't like, ladies and gentlemen, by the swearing they're doing at the people they don't like. And that is not going to be changed just because you get rid of the symbol. Okay, but on to the fact these are a symbol of past defeat. And we say that actually not only are they bad propaganda, ladies and gentlemen, in that there's no longer the mass rallies, but more importantly, the Nazis and the Soviets lost. We say those that are radical in society tend to be the young. They tend to be wanting a successful change from what they see as being an unsuccessful past. They don't want to revert from the unsuccessful past to the one that was defeated by the thing that they see as being wrong at the moment. It wasn't even powerful enough to win the war with a democracy that they don't like at the moment. They tend to go for new and innovative change rather than old change, ladies and gentlemen, that wasn't successful in the first place. And we say, therefore, they have power on our side of the house in that they were defeated. But finally, ladies and gentlemen, we say that we want to identify them. If you join under the banner of a Nazi swastika, you cannot claim that you were susceptible to their ideology without realizing the full extent of their ideology. Everyone understands who Nazis were, ladies and gentlemen. By going under that banner, you cannot manipulate people into thinking you are reasonable and therefore gaining support. Therefore, we think, ladies and gentlemen, it's good that they can be identified. But more than that, if they're right,
We want to be able to clearly recognize these people immediately on a governmental level when they are causing such disturbances by letting them use these offensive symbols and helping us therefore be able to find the perpetrators immediately. Thank you very much.
And concluding the debate from the proposition side, Government Whip Simon Quinn.
Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, fellow devotees of Skype, our opposition is brave enough to admit that they also hate Nazis. They hate their skinheads, their fascist spitting, every other aspect of who and what they are. But unfortunately, they didn't have the courage today to tell us that they would follow that to the logical conclusion of proposing, as we propose on the proposition side, to get rid of their fundamental symbols. I want to talk about two things to close out the proposition bench today. First of all, I want to talk about the moral role of symbols, and in particular, symbols' role symbolically in society. Then I want to go on and talk about a very important aspect of the debate as we've moved along, which is the actual practical consequences of symbols as rallying points for groups and for precisely the kind of intolerance that this debate has been about. So let's turn then to the issue of the role of symbols in society, because we had this Dan Brown-like discussion of symbology coming out from the closing side, and I want to start with that. And can I say for the viewers at home, it was a terrible, terrible movie. They said the swastika... No, I want to follow this logic. Number one, the swastika had no inherent meaning before the Nazis. Then the Nazis came along and slaughtered a lot of people, invaded most of Europe, and then the swastika had meaning. Therefore, this is important in the context of symbology. If that shows us anything, it shows us precisely what the proposition team has been showing, which is that the swastika is unambiguously wrapped up with an understanding of deep-seated, no thank you, pain and suffering. Moreover, for them to claim in the abstract that some religious groups have symbols that are very important to them is entirely beside the point for a few reasons. Firstly, we didn't claim on this side that they are not important. The discussion about foundational rights was much deeper than that. In the context that Alex explained, namely that there is nothing inherent in a symbol, no thank you, that is directly relevant to your right to participate in a discussion or a democracy. Moreover, what if I found a religion with a religious symbol and my religion stands for wiping out every member of another religion? Then we would say on proposition, as Will said, that we'd ban that symbol too. No thank you. So then we had the idea about rights to feelings, something that Sheng Wu brought up. And he said, look, feelings are subjective, they're not publicly observable, and therefore we don't have a legitimate government role here. However, there are a number of reasons this is wrong. James pointed out the first one. Firstly, violence in a sense can be deeply subjective, but we all accept in this debate the legitimacy of banning that. No thank you. Secondly, as the proposition team showed throughout, there is a deep common meaning to what these symbols are. These are not just idiosyncratic signs that people interpret in vastly different ways. We know what they mean and we think it's wrong, so why shouldn't we ban them?
Alex claimed that symbols don't express coherent opinions. James claimed that Nazi symbols are equivalent to hate speech because they express those views. Who is right?
We're both right because you've misunderstood what was being said. What was being said on the one hand by James is that they do have this deep inherent value. What was then explained by Alex was in the context of the argument about a foundational right, namely that the symbol in and of itself is not necessary to participate in a conversation, in a discussion in society. And finally, no thank you, in response to that, we say, and I'll go on to expand on that it facilitates hatred, exactly the point that Alex took up in extension. So then we had this idea of violence, because Sheng Wu went on to argue in a context that, look, we really need to worry about harm and oppression primarily in the context of violence. However, James firstly said, well, in many cases, there is much more harm than merely the violence, particularly in the context of oppression. However, no thank you. As Alex went on to explain, there is a deep-seated practical relationship between these symbols, no thank you, and an understanding of violence. In terms of the symbols being particularly seductive, in terms of racism being understood, no thank you, as a coordination problem. I think I'm a Nazi, I have deep-seated Nazi tendencies. What am I looking for? Other people who share my beliefs so that we can found and continue a social movement. That's the role of symbols. No, thank you. That brings me then to the idea of a taboo, because Sheng Wu genuinely thought, at least at some level of abstraction, that the word damn and the swastika are somehow analogous. Ladies and gentlemen, my first point is it's a swastika. My second point is it's a swastika. I'll skip the third point. And I'll leave it to you to fill in the gaps. The fundamental point is this, that when this was basically pointed out on a point of information, he said, no, but what you get is a new extra taboo. So ladies and gentlemen, apparently it's not enough for the opposition that we have the taboo, no thank you, of the swastika being associated with vast genocide. We're now going to have the extra taboo that our government has said that is wrong. And we simply don't think that's a basic enough argument. As Alex explained, no thank you, and I've touched on this, we have to understand this in the context of rights. Not merely power, not merely oppression, but also individual rights. And for the reasons I've dealt with, we don't think, no thank you, this is relevant to individual foundational rights. So let's turn then to this extension about the practical consequences. We had a number of questions here. First, we were told these are historical reference points. And we were accused of a contradiction here that blatantly simply wasn't. No thank you. Because Will said, you can show these symbols in a museum or for educational purposes. To which Alex added, that means that you can take your child to the museum, no thank you, and discuss the past in an historical context. There is simply no contradiction there. Moreover, and more fundamentally, it is an empirical question whether the people of Estonia or any other country think that the Soviet propaganda is a part of their national identity and something that they are happy with. And when the government decided to remove a large, impressive statue of a Soviet soldier last year, I think it's an empirical question that the Estonian people answered, and I'm happy to leave it up to them. Moreover, as we explained, it should be up to the people to choose and to change their national identity, rather than encouraging feelings of nostalgia. And as was mentioned, Russia should ban it as well. To this historical point was added by the closing team, they lost. This reminds us of historical failure. The whole point we're having this debate is because neo-Nazis and other neo-groups wish they hadn't lost and want to change that in future. And that's why we're happy to stand in proposition. The closing opposition had already discussed religious symbols, which I have already mentioned. So then we had this argument that it is better that we know them, to which we say, well, why? Who cares to engage in a debate that they themselves is not legitimate, Moreover, as we explain, more important than the government knowing these supporters is that other supporters will know these supporters. And this is why we have very important practical consequences. Finally, we had this extraordinary point that we will annoy the Russians. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm happy to stand in proposition and say that we're on a side that doesn't think that the domestic policy of Western Europe as regards minorities, civil liberties and a whole range of other issues should be determined by what the government of Russia thinks. Particularly, God forbid, if that government is supposedly getting more and more fascist, and people might associate that with the Nazis. And ladies and gentlemen, for all of those reasons, I'm very happy to stand in proposition. Thank you.
And concluding the final of this year's European Championships, Mr. Jonathan Nieder-Maynard.
Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, no one on opposition has claimed to you today that the meaning of Nazi and Soviet symbols is not ambiguous, or that it is not wrong, or that the people who believe it are not filth. We have claimed that that is not enough. There are three reasons why. I'm going to talk first of all about what is the power of symbols, what Simon missed about Louis' extension, which is that the harms that they've talked about actually depend upon an analysis that they've never given us. Secondly, I'm going to talk about the right to express symbols and why we don't think they're based upon whether those symbols are right or not. And then thirdly, I'm going to talk briefly about how societies do tackle extremism and difficult discourse. So what is the power of symbols, ladies and gentlemen? Well, we say that of course symbols do have power. We don't deny that in opposition. We said a couple of things, first of all. We said that power works both ways. We think the power that symbols have to stand for things that are wrong is also a power to constitute that wrongness in everyone who knows that it's wrong. When Will got up at the very beginning and said that, there is the constitution of meaning and that symbols constitute meaning, we say yes. And we think it's important that Nazi symbols and Soviet symbols constitute our understanding of evil. And we think our understanding of evil and our understanding of those symbols is lessened if you remove our ability to look at them. We also say that that power is entirely dependent upon how it is used. And they have proposed that symbols, just by existing, have a kind of harm, and have never analysed why that harm exists, and we've done that. So there's two powers that I want to look at that they have. There's the power to offend and oppress, which was most what we had. And then briefly I'll deal with the power to radicalize and convert. So yes, we do think symbols offend. We do think they stand for ideas which we hate, and we do think that it makes people scared. My response to that is good. We think they should scare people because we think they represent more fundamental ideas that exist in society that are scary. We think the symbols represent what the people who follow them stand for, and they will stand for those things whether they hold the symbols or not, ladies and gentlemen. So we think it is good that we can see the people who we should be afraid of. We think it's good that we can see the symbols by which they stand and the people from history that they associate it with, ladies and gentlemen. They talk to us about relations of power. We say that, first of all, this is oppression. If it's actually that there's a relation of power already in place and that the symbol reinforces that, then we say that your actual danger there is that people who use these symbols get into positions of power. We say that is much, much easier if you ban them from using the very symbols which allows us to identify them as extremists and associate themselves with the evil which we stand against. No, thank you. We say that if they remove and just use other symbols, it's much more easy for them to get into positions of power. No, thanks. And we say then those new symbols become dangerous. We say the other power they gave us, no thank you, is the power to to cause fear and to scare people. And we said, yes, I'm scared about fascist groups, ladies and gentlemen. I'm scared about militant communists. I'm scared about that because of what they believe. Unfortunately, I don't think that everyone out there knows everything that fascist parties stand for or everything that militant communists stand for, and so they might not fight against them with the fervour that I do just by finding out their beliefs. I think it is useful that instead a whole broad stratum of the population can come out and fight against these people by identifying them as evil, not by looking at the manifesto on their website, but seeing that they carry the banner of a man who murdered 6 million Jews. Ladies and gentlemen, I think that is useful. I also say that if you do think that fear is a harm, ladies and gentlemen, if you do think symbols can hurt people, they can hurt people a lot more if people never have to confront those ones from history. We say putting up banners in society like Nazi symbols and Soviet symbols helps because people have to deal with them, ladies and gentlemen. Other symbols might be dangerous as well. It's not just the swastika and it's not just the Soviet symbol, ladies and gentlemen. We say societies can be more resistant, can be more capable of dealing with fear if they have to confront it, ladies and gentlemen, and don't wrap themselves inside a bubble. No thanks. We say that equally the power to radicalize and convert depends upon a very different use, no thanks, of these symbols than actually they were ever given in history. There was a reason why the Nuremberg rallies were millions strong and not 40 skinheads walking down the backyard, ladies and gentlemen. We think they look pathetic, we think they look defeated, we think they look ridiculous, and we think that that is good. So secondly, no thank, all right, Simon, go ahead.
Okay, so if, as you claim, it is so useful for these groups when we ban their symbol and make them a taboo, then why do they fight back so often when we try to do it?
Because, Simon, I don't think that Nazis are very clever. I think if they chose the best tactics to get into government, they might, if they just wanted power, they might stand for something else. We say the right to express symbols was only argued against by Alex. Let me just deal with it briefly. He said that the reason why you don't have a right to express symbols is because they're not necessary to your participation. They're not necessary to your identity and to expressions of your beliefs. We first of all say, why? Why is that not up to the individual to decide, ladies and gentlemen? We say, look at religions. We say, look at political parties that have symbols. We say, look at the flags of countries. Participation is meaningless if it is divorced from the identity of the individual involved. If they can't use symbols to express their identity, we say that's a problem, so they do have a right. We also say it somewhat undermines Prop's claim to defend the cause of freedom if they think that the state can legitimately articulate to individuals what does and does not constitute their identity. No, thank you. We think that's also called oppression. So the final idea we've had from side proposition is, but this is different, because these symbols just are beyond the pale. They're just evil in a way that nothing else is. First of all, ladies and gentlemen, I want to know where that line is drawn. I want to know where it is that something suddenly becomes self-evidently evil, because clearly not everyone agrees, ladies and gentlemen. And what's happened when we prodded deeper and asked them that question and said, but what about if they choose other symbols? What about the mere fact that they're skinheads? Then Will gave us the response, oh, well, we can ban them too. So at the end of the day, why not just lock them all up? why not just put all the extremists in prison if everything that they say and everything that they do is so wrong, ladies and gentlemen? We say it's because that there are some rights that are fundamental no matter what you say. It's because there are some rights that are fundamental even if you are wrong, ladies and gentlemen, and that because we can't draw that dividing line, we can't know when this power that they are giving the state would be abused, that we can't do it. We finally say that the real process of historical catharsis, ladies and gentlemen, the real time when societies deal with the problems of extremists in their midst is when they have to face them, when they have to argue against the validity, when people have to go out on the streets against the people carrying Nazi flags and say, down with fascism, down with racism. We say that is a better way for societies to be cured than preventing them ever having to deal with that problem, ladies and gentlemen. We have shown you that Proposition has misconceived of the power of symbols. We have shown you that they have established nothing to the fact that there is no right to express symbols, and they have misunderstood the way that societies deal with extremism. Don't wrap people within a bubble, ladies and gentlemen. Make them deal with it. I'm proud to stand in opposition.
Thank you very much, distinguished debaters.